Welcome to Priceless Takes.
And we are live from South Carolina in the United States. Welcome back, everyone, to Priceless Takes, episode 40. Joining me on today's show is a long-time guest on the show, making his first appearance in quite some time, the one and only, the guru, self-proclaimed, but he does tend to back it up occasionally. David Price, how are you today?
Well, thank you, Luka. It's very early here, but apart from that, I'm going well. Thank you.
David is currently live from Brisbane, Australia, where that is my hometown, but I'm over here in South Carolina, soaking in the best of the NFL. We are 2 weeks in to the season, ladies and gentlemen, and everything is kicked off. Now, last night we had the New York Giants and the San Francisco 49ers playing to kick off the week. We have plenty of action to cover along with stuff that happened from last week's games. But we will get straight into it with last night's Thursday night football game featuring the New York Football Giants and the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers came away with a convincing 30-12 victory in San Francisco, moving to 3-0 on the season. New York had a chance to cut the lead to 3 points late in the third quarter, but failed, and the game was practically over from there. San Francisco ran away with it. Brock Purdy, 25 of 37 for 310 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. On the other side, Daniel Jones was 22 of 32 completions for 137 yards, 0 touchdowns, and an interception. Now, David, the thing to note about this game, Brock Purdy now moves to 11-1 all time as the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers and is 9-0 in the regular season, stemming back to the middle of last year when he first took over as the starting quarterback. His only loss came at the hands of the Philadelphia Eagles in last year's NFC Championship game, in which we both know he came off injured in the first quarter. So, David, my question to you is, the 49ers have been dominant throughout the first 3 games of the season, but do you think right now that they are the best team in the NFL?
Good question, Luka. I thought Purdy played well yesterday, but I thought he was a little bit loose in some of his passes and got a little bit lucky that he didn't throw some picks. In my view, he could have thrown 2, maybe 3 picks, but that just didn't come off for him. Look, he's still finding his feet. To me, he looked a little bit nervous. He played a solid game. He's still basically a rookie. So look, he's going well. He's got a great defense, which is really, really helping him. I tipped them yesterday. I thought they were certain he's going to cover the line. So it's interesting. Do I think they can win the Super Bowl? I don't know. At the moment, it's very open. I'm really not sure who can win the Super Bowl. It's incredibly open, and the market says the same thing. It's $6.50 the field. So it's a good question. It's a hard one to answer. What do you think?
Well, I personally think right now, the way that the 49ers have looked through these first 3 games, I think I can definitively say they are the best team in the NFL as of the 22nd of September, the 23rd for you, 2023. Throughout the first 3 weeks, they have looked dominant on both sides of the ball. Look, I will give you, Purdy did look a bit shaky, particularly in the first quarter last night. He did have that one that was thrown in the end zone to George Kittle that the Giants safety dropped. That could have easily been an interception. He did have another one in the flat that could have been picked. So I do definitely agree with you. But the beauty of Purdy on the San Francisco 49ers is that the defense is still their strongest side of the football. So even if Purdy hypothetically did throw those interceptions, granted it was the Giants, the defense was harassing Daniel Jones all night. The Giants only had 150 total yards for the whole game, rushing and passing. They barely had any rushing the entire game. San Francisco had 441 yards the entire game. That's only 3 times the yards that they had compared to the Giants. And that's what the 49ers do to you on the defensive end. They get off the field quickly and get the offense back on. They give them short fields to go and score touchdowns and easy scores. Now, The only thing that does concern me is we look who the 49ers have played. They did go on the road and beat the Steelers, who, in my opinion, have been one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL so far. They did beat the Cleveland Browns, but you, as well as myself, in our prior conversations, thought the Steelers would have a much better start to the season than what they have.
Yes.
They've looked disappointing. San Francisco did go and beat them. They did beat the Rams in LA last week. Now, the Rams have surprised, again, both of us in the way they've played so far, especially without Cooper Kupp, especially losing two key defensive players in their defensive line. And they only just squeezed past the Rams. The Rams gave them a run for their money. Now, we know the Rams, up until that the championship game, the Rams had always played okay against the 49ers, but the 49ers still have had the upper hand on the Rams until that year the Rams went to the Super Bowl. But I look at who the 49ers have to play still. They still have to play the Cowboys, the Bengals, the Eagles, the Jags, and the Ravens. Now, those are not going to be easy games for the 49ers, and we're definitely going to see them tested in weeks to come. They play Dallas in 2 weeks' time. They play the Cardinals next weekend, and we can both agree that the Cardinals pose no threat to the San Francisco 49ers in that game. But I think right now they are the best team in the NFL from both sides of the football.
Okay. I can. I'm still not convinced on Purdy. I'm convinced on Purdy. I'm convinced on Purdy long term. No question about it. The way he's going as a rookie quarterback is fantastic, and he's going to be a superstar player. But I'm just not sure
Yeah.
if he's got the nerves. I'm just not convinced on him yet
Yeah, well, the
at
other
this
thing
time
to
of his
note about
career.
the other thing to note about he had off-season surgery, so it's not like he was healthy and then was able to go through the off-season healthy and do the things he was able to do. He had surgery on his elbow and was out for numerous months. He really only got
Hmm.
back right at the start of preseason. So, if anything, he's still maybe the nervousness, I think, largely is to do with the fact that he's still like getting back into the swing of things. Like it's his throwing elbow in his arm. So when you're a quarterback
Hmm.
throwing the ball, that's incredibly important. But I think we saw Purdy come in last year and he settled in straight away. I think as the season goes on, he will continue to settle in. And I was one of the biggest advocates against Brock Purdy in the playoffs last year because of the inexperience that he had when you compared him to the other quarterbacks, particularly Jalen Hurts, who looked much better throughout the playoffs than Purdy. But now with Purdy having he will hopefully have a full season under his belt. I picked the 49ers to get to the Super Bowl in my preseason picks. I'm not going to definitively say that they're going to win the Super Bowl because on the other side, my other Super Bowl pick, the Bengals, hasn't looked too good throughout the first 2 weeks. So I'm going to hold off on that. But they should be right up there in terms of the betting favorites to win the Super Bowl, in my opinion, personally, based on what we've seen from the other teams, because Kansas City hasn't been consistent. Cincinnati hasn't been consistent. Philadelphia, they're also 2-0, but they haven't looked that impressive throughout the first 2 weeks. So I think the 49ers should be right in there for the betting favorites to the Super Bowl, if not the favorite right now throughout 3 weeks.
Yeah, as I said, it's very open at the moment.
It is.
The form's up and down.
Look, I do agree. I do agree, but we will switch gears to the Cincinnati Bengals, who we just previously mentioned will play the 49ers later in the season. The Cincinnati Bengals find themselves in an 0-2 hole, which is the second time in 2 years they've started off the season 0-2. They play the Rams this week at home. Now, the more concerning thing for the Cincinnati Bengals, in last week's loss to the Baltimore Ravens, Joe Burrow aggravated his calf injury in the fourth quarter of that game. This is the same calf injury that he suffered during preseason and left many Cincinnati staff and players concerned, but he has been out there throughout the first 2 weeks. He hasn't practiced all week until today, where he was seen throwing the football in full pads. However, his status for the Rams is questionable. Now, David, we have both. Well, actually, that's not completely true. I have been on the Cincinnati bandwagon since mid last year. It took you a couple more months for you to hop on the bandwagon by the time it hit the playoffs. But they did start 0-2 last year and then proceeded to win 14 of 16 games into the playoffs until they lost to Mahomes in the AFC Championship game. But Joe Burrow was completely healthy last year, and it seems that he is not completely healthy right now, which in my opinion makes the task so much harder for the Bengals, particularly when you look at their schedule. But I will ask you first, before I comment, how concerned do you think Cincinnati should be about their Super Bowl aspirations, which is what we were all hoping would be for them this year?
You still have a poster of Joe Burrows in your bedroom, and are you still in love with him?
Well, the jersey is currently sitting in there to my right, if you must know. I did have it on because I did need a Cincinnati win against the Ravens, but it only comes out for special occasions.
How concerned am I? The Bengals aren't playing well, but the Ravens always, regular season, are a very strong team. Come playoffs, I always think Lamar lets them down. And I don't think Lamar is as good as Lamar thinks he is. So I think this week the Bengals are absolute certainties. I think the Rams have come in underrated by the other teams, like you and I both underrated the Rams. So when you come in underrated, you can sneak under the radar. But the Rams won't sneak under the radar this week. The Bengals have to win, and they will come out and they will destroy the Rams, and the Rams will be exposed, and the Bengals will get their season going.
And my question to you, David, is if Joe Burrow's calf isn't good enough to play on the weekend, how do you see the game changing with the backup quarterback?
Look, the Bengals still have to win, and I still don't rate the Rams. So I think Burrows will play. I think they're going to they have to start winning, as simple as that. They can't go 0-3. Or their season's really looking in disarray. So even though he's got a sore calf, I think they'll jab him, and he'll play, and they'll win. I certainly wouldn't rest him.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I agree. Listen, I hate to compare myself, but speaking from personal experience, I know what Joe Burrow is like with his sore calf. I had a bit of a calf problem myself recently, and it's not good. They're not ideal. But when you're getting paid 270,
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you about the calf injury. How debilitating is it? Because you're out for a season with a calf. So how do you think Burrows is coping mentally?
Yeah.
How much is it affecting his game?
Well, the thing with Burrow is he doesn't rely on his legs as a part of his game. He very much stays in the pocket and picks his opponent to pieces. So from that perspective, that is probably better for his calf because he's able to drop back and stay in the pocket. However, the Cincinnati offensive line hasn't been performing terribly well, and this was one of the big needs they had to address in the offseason. They signed Orlando Brown Jr. from the Chiefs, the star left tackle, and they got Alex Kappa back. But the thing that does concern me about the Rams is Aaron Donald, arguably, still, he's also got under the radar, Dad. He's a defensive player, 3-time defensive player of the year. Super Bowl, not quite. He should have won the Super Bowl MVP, arguably over Cooper Kupp, but he's a top 3 defensive player in the history of the game, and he wreaks havoc on the defensive line. That's one thing that I am worried about with Joe Burrow and his calf is Aaron Donald coming through the line because he is an absolute force and he is a game wrecker. So Cincinnati need to prepare adequately to face Aaron Donald because otherwise Joe Burrow is going to be in a lot of strife. And that's the one thing that scares me is Aaron Donald versus Joe Burrow. But staying in the pocket, Joe Burrow should be able to neutralize his calf. He really only jeopardizes it is when the pocket collapses and he has to scramble outside of the pocket and he has to use his legs. That is when it is in jeopardy. But I completely agree with everything you said. The Cincinnati Bengals need to win this week. They absolutely need to win this week. And when we talk about underestimating the Rams, I don't think it's even underestimating the Rams. I think it's more so underestimating Sean McVay, which you still need to recognize. He is still one of the best coaches in the NFL. And I think that that is really who we're underestimating because Stafford didn't play most of last year. They've got this guy, Puka Nakua, who's a fifth round pick in the draft, who's got the most receptions by any player ever through his first two games in NFL history. Like they're showing up right now. But I agree. No one has expected the Rams to be this good. They're traveling to Cincinnati. It's a must-win game, and Cincinnati is gonna get it together and win this game because they simply don't have any other choice. I will throw out some stats for you, David, because you know I like my stats. Only two teams have won the Super Bowl after starting 0-2, which is where Cincinnati are right now. And those are the 1993 Dallas Cowboys and the 2007 Giants. Now, since 1990, 4 out of 158 teams that started the season 0-3 have even made it to the playoffs. That's 2.5% have made the playoffs when they've started 0-3. We're not even talking about getting to the championship game or the Super Bowl. We're talking about making the playoffs. 2.5% of all teams have gone to the playoffs since 1990. So, as good as Cincinnati are, they cannot afford to lose this game. They cannot afford to lose this game at all, and I don't believe they will.
I agree. McVay is, you know what I think of McVay. I think he's the best coach in the league. I think he'll turn out to be a legend coach. Um, he really is a superstar. So he's off to a good start, but I think it'll come to an end this week.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it has to because you see some teams that people aren't expecting to do so good. They beat the Seahawks, they beat the
Yeah,
49ers, but sorry, they lost to the 49ers. But when you think about those games, those are two divisional games, and those are teams that McVay is used to playing. So you would think when
mm,
looking at those two games that he is used to playing against those teams and he has a good idea schematically what works
yeah,
and what doesn't.
yeah.
Obviously, he knows what the Bengals are about. They played them in the Super Bowl. So from that perspective, you would think that he would know how to beat them. But the other thing is when playing the same team twice, particularly now they're in Cincinnati, you would think Cincinnati is going to make the necessary adjustments and I would expect something drastic to happen this week because Cincinnati, so far throughout these first two games, they're a bottom three offense in the league. They're 30th in points per game. They're last in yards per game, 30th in pass yards, and 28th in rushing. That is absolutely abysmal, even after Joe Burrow didn't he played okay against the Ravens. He stunk it up against the Browns. We all know this, but he played all right against the
Yeah,
Ravens, but not good enough to
yeah,
win the game. The thing that concerns me about the Bengals in the long run is not even at 0-2, they still have a very uphill battle because on their schedule,
yes. They've got a hard schedule. Yes.
they face the 49ers, they face the Buffalo Bills, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Baltimore Ravens again. Now, even more concerning is all of those games are on the road except for Buffalo, who they face at home. So when you look at the Jags, Chiefs, and the Ravens, and including the Bills, those are four out of six of the best teams in the AFC. Three of them you're playing on the road. So if that's I don't even know what to say because that is a very uphill task, and they really need to start getting into the swing of things because if they lose all of those games, that's going to be 8 losses on the
They're
season, and
gone.
I don't think you can. The AFC this year is so competitive. If you come in with a record of 9-8, you're not making the playoffs. You need 10 wins plus to
No,
even make the playoffs. And at this point, I would even go as so far to say I do not think the Cincinnati Bengals are going to win the division. I think at this point, with how good the Baltimore Ravens are in the regular season, I think the Ravens will win the division, assuming Lamar stays healthy, and the Bengals will come in as a wild card team. But I still believe in them because we know how good they can be and how hot they get when everything clicks and they go on their big runs.
yes. agree with all of that, but we have to wait and see because the thing concerning me greatly with the Bengals is their schedule. As you said, they've got enormous teams to play on the road, and they're going to have to be absolutely at their best. And all teams are prepared for the Bengals because they know how good they can be. So there's no easy games coming, and the
Yeah.
uphill battle is really there.
Yeah, and this is the other thing, and I believe in the Bengals the same way, ironically, I believe in my Clippers, is that when the Bengals play the best is when they're flying under the radar and they're doubted, they're the dark horses, and then they have that underdog mentality. But when they do all the talking, like you saw how before the Kansas City game last year, they were all saying Burrow ahead this, Burrow ahead that, like we're gonna be the champions, whatever. When they do the talking, when they get full of themselves, just like the same thing in the NBA, that's when the rubber meets the road and they don't perform well. So I'm desperately hoping at 0-2, they've kicked into another gear and they have now become the underdogs again, which is where I believe they perform the best. But David, as you stated, we will have to wait and see how it turns out because we will see in Monday Night Football, prime time. Like this is the game. Like, there's no bigger
We,
stage than Monday Night Football.
if if they get beat if they get beat by the Rams this week, I believe their season is over.
Yeah, yeah. I think not only from a statistical point of view, but also just the mental block that provides with those five teams you have to play. It would just be an absolute disaster of a season from the Cincinnati Bengals. But I'm not counting them out yet. I picked them to win the Super Bowl at the start of the season. I'm going to stand by my pick because we did see what they did last year. And I believe Joe Burrow has got more in the tank and he can motivate the team, along with Zach Taylor and the Bengals staff, to dig themselves out of this early hole.
Yep. Okay, I'm not convinced at the moment, but we'll wait and see.
Listen, we will now go more, speaking from a bigger picture, talking about the AFC East, which features several teams that are certainly not used to being underdogs and certainly used to being the talk of the town. The AFC East in preseason was picked to be the most hotly contested division in football, featuring the Buffalo Bills, Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots, and the New York Jets. Mainly the talk of the town being Aaron Rodgers arriving in New York to hopefully breathe some life into this Jets franchise. He was injured in his fourth play of his Jets career, torn Achilles, out for the season, absolutely crushing. Now, for the rest of the division, the Miami Dolphins are leading the division right now at 2-0, picking up road victories versus the Chargers and the Patriots. The Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets both at 1-1, but the Buffalo Bills had a big win last week, 38-10 against the Raiders, which was much needed for Josh Allen. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the division, the Patriots are looking to avoid their first 0-3 start since 2000, which was Belichick's first year in New England. So, Miami plays Denver this week at home, their first home game, while the Buffalo Bills travel to Washington to face the Commanders, who are 2-0 on the season so far. Then Miami travels to Buffalo to face the Bills next week. Because of the Aaron Rodgers injury, I think we can both agree, David, that it's a two-man race for the division title between the Dolphins and the Bills. So I will ask you, who is the best team in the division right now out of those two teams?
Look, I love the Buffalo Bills, and
I do.
I've got a photo of Josh Allen next to. I've got a photo of Josh Allen in my next to my bed. So I think Buffalo Bills are definitely the best team. I think this year Josh Allen will show everyone just how good he is. Miami Dolphins fly under the radar every year. Every year, everyone underrates them, and they don't get up against the Dolphins. They don't get up against Miami because they just think they're going to beat them. And Miami is just a very consistent team. So I really want Josh Allen to stand up this year and say, I am the man and take them all the way, which I believe he can. I know you don't think he can. Aaron Rodgers was
I
an
haven't said
absolute
anything yet.
disaster. I was watching that game and I felt so sorry for the Jets because I actually thought they could have a huge season and I thought they could really, really make the Super Bowl. I do think they could probably win it, but I thought they could definitely make it there. Now their season's over. The Dolphins just aren't strong enough to win a Super Bowl, so that leaves you with the Bills, which would really make me happy to see Josh Allen, get the ring and win the Super Bowl. So that's the
Listen,
Bills for me.
yeah, at this moment in time, I do believe the Dolphins are the best team in the division. I do believe they will win the AFC East because I just think on both sides of the ball, they're a more complete football team. Now, the only issue I have with the Dolphins is that Tua Tagovailoa's health, because last year he had the concussion injuries, which derailed their season effectively. But Miami still went to Buffalo in a playoff game and nearly won with their fourth string quarterback against Josh Allen, which is very reminiscent of how Josh Allen,
unbelievable game.
very reminiscent of how Josh Allen lost to the backup quarterback of the New York Jets, Zach Wilson, and threw 3 interceptions and a fumble. But look, we're not going to get into that because that was last year. That was last 2 weeks ago. He had a good game against the Raiders. I'll give him that, but he had to 31 of 37.
Game.
31.
A phenomenal game.
He did. I will give you that. He had a phenomenal game. 31 of 37 completions, 274 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He did everything he needed to do, but no one was giving the Raiders a shot to go to Buffalo and beat Buffalo. So we're not going to act like the Raiders ever had any chance to beat the Bills. But Josh Allen, I will give him his credit. He had the perfect game that he needed to have to reignite some confidence into the Buffalo Bills. When I look at these two teams, I just look at the explosiveness of the Miami Dolphins offense, not to mention the acquisitions they have made on defense. They have Christian Wilkins and Bradley Chubb in the defensive line. They acquired Bradley Chubb from my Denver Broncos. Now they have Xavier Howard, who's a defensive player of the year candidate nearly every year, and Jalen Ramsey, who still hasn't actually played yet for the Miami Dolphins, the cornerback from the Rams, who is not quite at his prime right now, but I still believe that the Dolphins defense is better than the Bills defense, which is still a very good defense. They have Von Miller, they have Leonard Floyd, they have Matt Milano, they have a lot of players. And this is probably going to be a very, very close race between the two teams. But I think that the Dolphins are the better team. I can't say with any certainty until I see them play this week if they're going to win in Buffalo. But I think that the next game is going to be very interesting between the two teams. You look like you're itching to say something, David, so I'll hand it over to you before I continue.
I think last year in Buffalo, because I tipped Buffalo heavily to everybody, I think Buffalo underrated the Dolphins, and I think they came in too confident, and that's why they got such a fright from the Dolphins. I think this year they'll be fully prepared for the Dolphins and they'll smash them. I think you're underestimating the Bills. I think the first loss of the season they were too confident and they got a shock. And then last week they showed how good they really are. And I think you'll see the Bills go right on with it now and become favourites, clear favourites to win the Super Bowl like they were last year. And they were disappointing. I think this year they can go all the way.
Well, listen, if there is a year for the Bills to do it, especially with the Bengals' early season struggles, you'd think it would have to be this year because the Chiefs haven't quite looked like themselves. Jacksonville, who I believe was also a threat, I think that they're still a young team, so I still have plenty of confidence in them. I have them going to the AFC Championship game, but you would think, as well as with Aaron Rodgers getting injured, that it's screaming for Josh Allen to finally grow a pair and do something with his career as opposed to flunking out of the playoffs every single year like he does. Because seriously, the NFL gods are praying for him to do something. Because I've told you from the beginning, I do not believe he is the quarterback to win a Super Bowl unless they go ahead and fire their head coach Sean McDermott, because I believe one of those two need to go. Now, nevertheless, I think the Bills personally need to worry about...
McDermott is the problem, not Josh Allen. McDermott is the problem.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing.
McDermott.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. That's why I'm saying I'm willing to give Josh Allen somewhat of a pass, but he is still the one out on the field. So until I see otherwise, I believe that McDermott is very much at least a large portion of the reason. But Josh Allen's still the one playing on the field. Now, the one thing I will say is that Buffalo is going to Washington and Miami is at home. So both of them are going to be traveling back to Buffalo. But I think the Bills personally need to worry about this week's game against the Washington Commanders because they have had a
Yes.
great start to the season. I actually picked the Commanders to make the playoffs, and so far they're proving me right. I picked them to make the playoffs in the NFC because defensively, they are very sound, and they have Eric Bieniemy now leading the offense, who was the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs under Andy Reid, who won those Super Bowls with Mahomes. He has scored countless amount of points. So they hung 35 on my Broncos last week in Denver, and in week one, they barely scraped by Arizona, but new team, new quarterback, new OC. That was always bound to happen in week one. Last year, they played extremely well last week. So I think Buffalo, I believe they will win in Washington. I don't believe it'll be a big win, though. I think it's going to be a close game. So Buffalo, I think, needs to worry about this week. The Dolphins, I hate to say it, but I think my Denver Broncos are in the mud completely. I don't give Denver much of a shot to
They are so overrated, the Broncos. They're absolutely disappointing. They're so disappointing. If I was a fan, I'd throw my jumper in the bin, or I might even burn it. They're the most disappointing team in the whole of the NFL, the Broncos.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah, I might be inclined.
How do you
I
feel
might
as
be
a
inclined
Broncos
to believe
fan?
you.
Are you ready? Are you ready to throw your jersey in the bin?
Not quite yet. I didn't get a Russell Wilson jersey for a reason, so I'm glad I didn't get that jersey because I don't think many jerseys of him will be going around
How
after this
bad?
season.
How bad is Russell going?
Listen, I will concede he isn't doing great, but he's still doing better than last year. Now the problem with the Broncos, and this is actually something that you might not know, David.
Hey,
But
can I ask you a question?
yes,
Can I ask you a question?
yes.
Was Russell Wilson? The Seahawks got rid of him for a reason.
Mm.
So, do you think Russell Wilson was overrated because of the way he's gone to the Broncos?
Big picture, I would say yes, because particularly when he won those Super Bowls with Seattle, won the Super Bowl. Sorry, he had that Legion of Boom defense. He had a top 5 running back in Marshawn Lynch. He had all the pieces around him to succeed. But I still believe I think he was not too overrated, but I believe last year with Nathaniel Hackett, that was just an absolute disaster because Nathaniel Hackett's Aaron Rodgers' guy. They got him as the head coach because they wanted Aaron Rodgers, and now look where he's at, the Jets now, with Aaron Rodgers again as the offensive coordinator there. But the thing with the Broncos, David, that you might actually not know is, did you know that the Denver Broncos actually lead the NFL in points per possession throughout the first 2 weeks of the season? Per possession, they actually have the most points averaged in the NFL. So my question is, what's happening with the defense? Because the defense can't get off the field to even give the offense a chance. Now, granted, Denver did have a 21-3 lead against Washington last week. So from that perspective, I look at the offense in the second half and I say to myself, you barely did anything in the second half and you completely collapsed. But the defense let up 32 points in the second half. So I think their problems are honestly more on the defensive side of the ball than the offensive side of the ball. And it's making Russell Wilson and the offense look worse than what they're actually playing.
Look, the Broncos thought they were home and stopped.
Yes, they did.
That's what happened. That's what happened. So you'd hopefully think that won't happen again, and now they've learnt their lesson. So that's the only hope you've got. If they learnt their lesson and now they can turn their season around, you've got a chance.
Yeah, look,
if they learnt their lesson from that, because that loss last week was embarrassing.
They can't 0-3. They're not going to beat Miami at home unless Miami does get the too confident syndrome and goes and thinks first home game they're going to breeze past the Broncos. But I still think Miami takes care of business. I think the Bills take care of business as well. David, would you agree?
Yeah, it's an interesting game, that one.
The Bills?
There's better bets from the round.
Yeah.
The Bills should win, but they won't win easily.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, definitely to monitor in the future. We will most certainly give you a deep dive into our predictions for the Buffalo Bills Miami Dolphins game next week, because that will certainly be a headliner. But that is all, ladies and gentlemen, for episode 40 of Priceless Takes. Thank you for joining us today. David, it was fantastic to have you back on the show. Thank you for joining. I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Luca.
Make sure to keep following us on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube for all the latest updates with Priceless Takes and in the sporting world. We are always active, and that is that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have been your host, Luca Price, and that is all for Priceless Takes, episode 40. We will see you next time.